Let's try to understand how networking is set up in WSL. First, open Windows Terminal. We have two operating systems, Windows and Linux. We will start HTTP servers, one in Windows and one in Linux, and then try to access these HTTP servers across operating system boundaries. I'm going to split the screen into two, and the left hand side is going to be used for the HTTP client. The upper right hand side is going to be a Windows HTTP server, and the lower right hand side is going to be a WSL HTTP server. I'm going to start a Windows HTTP server on port 7777. I'm going to start a Linux WSL HTTP server on port 8888. Now let's try to access both these servers from Windows itself. I'm going to use the curl command to first access the Windows server. The server is running on 7777. Once we send the request, we see that we got a response, and we also note that there is a log statement in the output of the Windows server. So this works fine and should not be a surprise. Now let's try to access the Linux server from Windows. The Linux HTTP server is running on port 8888, and I'm going to use the curl command again to make a HTTP request. Again, we see that we got a response from the Linux server, which was running on port 8888. Even though it is running on a different operating system, we were able to access that server as localhost. And this works because of port forwarding. When we use WSL, the Windows networking system configuration has been changed to enable port forwarding. When a Windows program like curl makes a TCP/IP request on a port, the Windows networking system will automatically forward the request to WSL if there is a WSL program listening on that port. So if you're a Windows user, everything works just fine. You can access both Windows as well as Linux based servers using localhost and the port on which they are listening. Till now we were using a Windows client to access HTTP servers on Windows and Linux. Now we are going to switch to a WSL Linux client and repeat the same process. I'm going to start a WSL Linux shell, and I'm first going to make a curl request from the WSL Linux to the HTTP server on WSL Linux itself. This server is running on port 8888. Since the client and server is on the same machine, same operating system, I expect this to work without any issues. And we see that we get a response. And we should also be seeing a statement in the output of the Linux HTTP server. Next, we are going to make a request to the Windows HTTP server from WSL Linux. The Windows server is running on port 7777. And I'm going to use the curl command again. Let's see what happens. So we see that we are not able to access the Windows HTTP server from WSL Linux. This is because unlike Windows, port forwarding has not been set up on the Linux side. So we will have to access the Windows system using its IP address. Before we do that, let's try to understand how networking works on the WSL system. When we enable WSL on Windows, a virtual network is set up. And Windows as well as WSL become virtual nodes on this virtual network. Each node has a unique IP address. And when we are making a request from WSL Linux to Windows, we have to use the IP address of the Windows machine to make that request. So we need to find the IP address of the Windows machine on the virtual network. For that, we are going to exit WSL and then we are in Windows again, and we have to run the ipconfig command. There's a lot of information, and if we scroll down a little bit, it will show us the IP address of the Windows machine on the virtual network. It is showing that it's 172.31.48.1. And this is the IP address that we should be using from within WSL Linux if we want to reach out to Windows. Let's go back to WSL and then use that IP address to make a HTTP request to the HTTP server running on Windows. The server is on 7777, and this time we get a response from the Windows HTTP server. So we see that accessing Windows from WSL Linux requires you to know the IP address of the Windows machine, and the reverse just works fine if you use localhost.